So, welcome to episode 1. I was bobbing my head up and down because I was listening to that public domain. Figured it would be a little more fitting than video game music that I normally use. So, but yeah. So, I am Dark Aries. Dark Aries Knight depends on the social media platform. And I figured I would start doing my tutorials on a separate channel. Really should also be streaming this to YouTube, but I forgot to set that up. So, figured I'd start with some basic stuff, mainly for kind of like a new install of OBS and things that I like to add on or rearrange or set up to make it easier, maybe explain different things. So that way, if you're starting from scratch, you have a better understanding of that software because it's pretty much the most recommended software for streaming. And if you are starting stream, or not even stream, but if you're using other video hosting platforms like Discord or Skype or Zoom, there's some usability with OBS that you might have not thought, but could probably enhance your experience. For example, if you have to do like a town hall or a classroom lecture or something, there's a little bit of a use case there that I think most people will find kind of interesting. If you've watched me try to stream the past couple times, notice that I'm a lot less blue this time. That has to do with the lighting. There's a window right there. It's kind of like behind the camera. There's a lot of sunlight coming in. And then I swapped out to a desk lamp that's right there to my right in the corner there, to kind of a more regular LED white. And then I also have a little video, little brick about the size of my phone. That's a little LED light. That's also, I removed the yellow kind of coloring gel to better match the daylight. And this camera does a pretty good job of picking me up. Nice, and the lighting kind of works. It's a very cheap 3-point lighting system, but that's kind of beyond what we're going to be doing here now. I'm going to assume this correctly, and I have okay, so this is a whole completely brand new OBS that I've opened up. It still has remnants of my current profile, so we're just going to actually create a new profile, and we're going to call it education. Why not? And then that's the stream profile, and we're also going to create a brand new scene selection, education. So if I was starting OBS from scratch, this is kind of what I'm looking at the moment and what everyone kind of looks at. So there's a couple things that I like to do. Actually, there's one thing that changes, and that's the fact that normally by default you'll have your desktop audio enabled and you'll have your mic enabled. That's actually one of the first. I disabled those right off the bat, and the reason being is that when those sources are enabled in OBS, every single scene that you create in OBS, even if you don't want them there. So what ends up happening is that you mute and unmute and mute and unmute your desktop audio depending on which source you might set up. So if you have like a closing or an intermission scene or a video scene or something or other, you always have to switch over, then unmute the source or mute the source before you switch over. That can cause mistakes, can cause problems. The easiest solution I've figured out is to just disable it and add the sources that you need on a scene-by-scene basis. Now, that is really annoying when you start off with a brand new OBS or when you're trying to set things up. But the fact that once you set it up, you don't have to change anything, and you don't have the chance to mistake having desktop audio on, for example, during a video play or anything like that, or having your mic still on even though you've gone to an intermission or anything else. You're streaming and you're playing a game and you didn't want Discord audio in when you switch the scene, as you created a brand new scene, but your desktop audio capture, it's always enabled here in OBS. So when all of a sudden, oh, I forgot to mute that audio, that's not going to be a thing. So that's one of the first things that I do here. If you see me kind of squinting, bear with me. My monitor is at 3-inch TV, and I've set it to 100% Windows scaling. So that way I effectively have 4 monitors right now. So what you're looking at is like a quarter, the top right quarter TV. So when everything's all kind of tiny, sometimes it's hard to see. Just gotta scratch the nose here. Make sure I don't touch my face. Okay. Yeah, you can change this because it changes the way the voice meters kind of work with this as well. Unless you're super into audio, you really don't have to change it. Monitoring device. This is a good thing right here. I probably won't do it a lot today unless I find the time to. I'm gonna try to keep these streams to kind of a time frame, go on forever. If I don't get to anything today, I can always do it the next stream. I also realized I forgot to hit start recording, but my recording is going to be the same quality as the stream, so that's okay. I will pull that VOD after. But the monitoring device is pretty useful. As you can see, I have different playback sources here. I have my mixer, I have the TV, I have a virtual audio cable, a bunch of different devices. And that plays into the fact that OBS allows you to patch an audio source from your scene into this monitoring device. So if you wanted to do a stream on a platform that involved having the desktop audio from a vid or the playback of a video or a game or some software that has its own sound, and you have your own microphone dealing with the volume controls of, let's say, Skype or Zoom or whatever program you're using, you could patch this all to a virtual audio device, and then that will be your sound. So as long as the program has can choose the specified audio device as a microphone, then you can literally pump anything you want through it. A bit more flexibility. And if you're using Discord as a platform, this is actually super useful because there's currently a bug where if you're screen sharing, the sound will start to crash static after some predetermined set of time. I think I experienced it about 5-10 minutes into a screen share that I was doing, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait, there's static in the sound. And then I looked it up and other people are also getting that issue. So that's one of the ways to bypass that. And then you get to control the volume levels of what you're doing there. So if you install a program like Voicemeeter that provides those virtual audio kind of connections there that work both as an input and output, you could select that as your monitoring, and then you can patch everything through there. Or if you have multiple audio devices, like you have a USB sound card plus your built-in sound card in your computer or anything like that, patch your game into it there so you can listen to it, or your microphone. So that way when you're testing sound sources, instead of going through Windows and doing the whole listen to this device, quick patch, and then you unpatch and you're good to go. So in that regards, this makes this program very flexible when you're doing those types of things. Oftentimes what I'll do is, if listening to my microphone to kind of configure it all, I will patch it into a separate channel on my mixer, and that way I can control the volume of that. But we're not going to touch that for now. Going over it is one of the things that I generally do. The important thing is disabling all of that. I suppose you could change that to 48,000. That's higher quality sampling rate. Apparently it must be restarted in order to do that. The default's that. We'll just leave it like that for now. This is in the settings menu, by the way. Generally don't touch anything here. Stream, this is where you'll connect. You have your Twitch, your YouTube, your mixers, all that fancy stuff, Facebook Live. So this is where you'll basically log into the. It's a lot easier now. Before, a couple updates ago, you had to manually sign into the website, and you'd get something called a stream key, which is like a very long password / phone number / email / however you want to describe it. It is some sort of designation that, hey, if I use this to stream to Twitch, Twitch goes like, oh, I know who you are, and then puts it on the correct web page. So know, hey, I am Dark Aries, and I'm going to be streaming to Dark Aries Twitch. That's not actually my Twitch, but because it was taken, but that's neither here or there. So it's a lot easier now. If you just click the service like Twitch and then connect, then it'll be like, oh, you need to sign in, and then I'm not going to do that right now because whatever. You also get the option of having features from that streaming service pop up in OBS, such as the chat on the side, or maybe the stream information like your title and what game, like that. So it's a lot easier and a lot more integration nowadays than what it used to be, so that's pretty nice. So this is where I also do a lot of changes when it comes kind of a first setup of OBS. I instantly get rid of simple mode. A lot of people keep their OBS on simple mode, but what happens is if you ever need to bitrate, for whatever reason, every single time I ask somebody to bump down their bitrate, it says that it won't let them. And every single time, it's. I don't know if this is an oversight or if it's just a problem between the person and there's an acronym there. I forget it. The problem with the person, not the actual software. But, advanced mode is where you get to do a bunch of fancy stuff. You can see that instantly here. As soon as the only thing you have is streaming and recording. For most people, maybe that's what you want. But if you're trying, I always switch it into advanced mode because it gives me a little more flexibility in what I'm trying to do. Since we're streaming, this all same, this CBR, constant bitrate. Basically, because of the way that streaming works, it works better if it's a constant flow of data that's the same size. Because if it size, it causes issues. That's beyond my skills of explaining. But Twitch requires, pretty much every single stream service provider requires you to be in CBR mode. Now, for streaming, that's just the way it is. For recording, you generally don't want to keep in CBR mode because it can be really wasteful. For example, we're staring at a screen right now that's literally static except for a tiny corner where my mouth and head kind of move around slightly. Potentially, I could have a lot of information on screen. I could be playing Counter-Strike, for example. There's a lot of movement going on, a lot of quick panning and everything. And that would require a very large amount of bitrate to not start blocking up, because bitrate is essentially the information that is being used to create your video image. It's like Lego blocks, essentially. So if you don't have enough Lego blocks to create your picture, you're going to have to take shortcuts, and those shortcuts involve blocking up the image because you've ran out of more image fidelity. And that's all fine and dandy when you have those super detailed images on screen. But when you have a super static image like we do now, it's very wasteful. So when it comes to streaming, it's kind of a fact of life. When it comes, don't have to do that. Now, if you are a new streamer, generally the average of 3,000 to 3,500 is pretty good. I'm going to actually do a bit of math here right now. Let's pop up this, oh my god, this calculator is going to be huge on screen. Okay, I don't know, it's just the window snapping thing that I have. So, you need to decide if you're going to be streaming 720 or 1080. If you're streaming in more action-y oriented games, probably better off going with 720p 60. You're streaming more casual stuff, more actual camera feeds, maybe slower paced games like Hearthstone, a 1080p 30 is where it's at. Unless you are partnered on Twitch to YouTube and you have the capability of streaming with very high bit rates, which most average households cannot, realistically. And if they can, it uses up almost all of their bit rate. If you have a lot of people at home, that bandwidth, I mean. So if you have a lot of people at home, that's not really going to work. 1080p 60 is generally out of the question. It's very resource intensive to have what most people would consider an acceptable image in the video engineering sense. Maybe this is kind of where it gets into being like you versus a CD or Spotify. If you listen to songs on YouTube, you're like, okay, that sounds pretty good. And then if you listen to that same song right after in Spotify or off a CD or anything in the higher quality, you'll instantly be like, oh, there's parts of this song that I wasn't hearing before. And that's just the way of compression. So, but let's do some basic math here. So if I want to stream 720p second, okay? So 720p image is 1280 pixels wide. It's 720 pixels high. We're going to be streaming at 60 frames a second. We're going to be using bits per pixel of 0.1, which basically means that for every single pixel, we're going to have 0.1 bits. Anything more, and it's extremely wasteful because we want the top end of this guesstimate of how much bitrate we're going to be using. Again, slower paced, like for this stream, 0.1 is definitely not what I'd be using. I'd be maybe using like 0 something, even 0.3. And then divided by 1,000 to get our kilobits per second. So 5,129.6. That's not exact. That's a rough guesstimate. And you'll see that this is the number that MLB TV uses, for example, for their 720p 60 frames a second. And I believe NHL TV in the States is also ran by that same streaming service, backend provider. So this leads to a 720p 60 stream that's really acceptable. It's not, there's going to be as much image fidelity as possible in 720p 60. If you blow it up on a TV, there's enough information that your TV will be able to kind of blow up the screen and have everything look kind of nice. If there's fast motion, it'll generally be able to deal with it. But as you can see, this is kind of high. And if you are if you're not a partnered streamer on Twitch, people could potentially have problems watching your stream with that. Because unfortunately, a lot of the world still doesn't really have good internet. And that was a terrible sentence. In either case, I'll get better at English. But let's say if we bump this down to streaming services, if you're watching movies and TV, well, movies are generally frames a second. So if we do the same math, oh, I screwed up my equation there. Oops. Forgot the decimal. Nope. That should be a divided. We have 2,211.84. So for movies, you can see a lot less bitrate is kind of needed to reach that fidelity. So on average, 30 frames a second. If we do that, it'll be a little bit higher. So 3,000 good, and then 3,500 means you're golden. Anything you stream at 30 frames a second, 720p, it's gonna look awesome. If you're gaming, 30 frames a second kind of sucks, because a lot of games that you try to play at 60 frames a second. So sometimes maybe that's a sacrifice you have to do. If you have a weaker internet connection, bump down from 60 to 30 for your stream. Because we did that advanced mode, your recording can always be the 60 frames a second, I believe. No, it can't. I'm lying. But it can be a higher fidelity. So if bumping down the bitrate is something you have to do, your recordings can be a higher quality. With 2 OBSs, you could do a double frame rate recording. But anyways, if we do 1080, which is 1920 wide, 1080 high, let's do 60 frames a second. You can see that to kind of, these numbers aren't purely accurate. There'll be variance here and there depending on the encoding methods and what software methods you use to compress your video to send out to the world. So there will be some variance here, but as you can see, a 1080p 60 stream requires over double the amount of information to kind of reach that point of diminishing returns in terms of quality, which is why you don't see a lot of 1080p 60 streams. And if you do, they're bit rate, and you will end up with those times where things become a blocky mess. Now, with better hardware and everything like that, you can kind of bring that number. But for the average person, this isn't going to be happening unless you have like gigabit connections, and pretty much only on YouTube. And even on YouTube, they will recompress the feed that you give them to better serve the general populace. I remember testing with somebody once. They were streaming to YouTube and they're like, why does it load? And then we kept bumping up the bit rate, and we literally pumped like 7,000 or 8,000 kilobits a second on the 720p 60 stream. And then we realized that YouTube was recompressing it down to like Anyways, so that's something to keep in mind. Now, if we take this down to 30 frames a second, though, we only end up with 6,200. That's a lot more reasonable. I'm not streaming at that bitrate, even though I'm streaming at 1080p 30 frames a second, because again, there's pretty much nothing going on. Static imagery going on, maybe a little bit of head bobbing left and right, so we can get away with this. But if I was playing like the latest and greatest video game to come out, and that game was 60 frames a second, would not be able to do that. So that's some basic math there. But if we use this for like a Skype or Zoom or Discord use case, none of this matters. This only matters if you're on actually streaming yourself to the services where you have to manually control the quality that you provide. So in this case, I'm going to be streaming that. Twitch requires a keyframe interval of 2. If you don't know what the keyframe interval of your streaming service is, they generally have a page of recommended settings for different streaming OBS and the like, so I would highly recommend you check that out. CPU usage preset. Now this is super interesting. Basically, this decides how hard you're going to be working to compress the video to this designated file size. So ultra fast means it's going to take a lot of shortcuts. It's not going to be very expensive, so weaker computers could probably run on that, and you'll be able to get that fidelity. And then placebo pretty much it's used for testing. No games with placebo. It's kind of ridiculous. It's literally meant, like, the point of diminishing returns is honestly probably around slow. Nobody realized placebo may be things, and you're doing a CRF, a constant rate factor, maybe, but for the most part, you'll never touch this. The goal is to kind of have this as with it having the least amount of impact on your computer. So what oftentimes people will do is they will set up their whole stream here. They will disable, that can take up resources, and then they will bump down. Where did I go? Output, here we go. They will bump down. Oh, we're back in simple. Bump this down a notch to just squeeze that extra bit of quality out there. Sorry, I see that I have a message and I don't want to pull it up. I got a slight hum going on my stream. It's probably the noise cancellation. Yeah, it's probably the fans in my room. But we can easily actually disable that because behind the scenes, I have it here somewhere. Hey, okay. Cool. Double voice to noise. So, anyways, back on topic. So that's one of the things that if you're streaming to a service, you'll kind of bump that down to squeeze the most amount of quality. Now, this is a pretty beastly computer that I'm currently operating on. Let's show some specs here right now for a second. So this is a computer specifically built for streaming. It has a lot of capture on it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so I have 4 HDMI inputs. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inputs that can do either digital or analog. And then I have an SDI input on here as well. So there's like 11 inputs that this computer is built to have. Your average computer does not have that many capture devices on it. It support physically that many capture devices. But if we take a look at yeah, cores as well, because it's a dual CPU computer. So this computer could go to like slow or very slow, and if that's the only thing I was really dealing with, that'd be fine. I generally keep I could honestly probably bump it up higher, but I like to have the flexibility. And realistically, even though I have like a bunch of cores, streaming is only going to take up a couple of them. It's not like it can spread itself across all of these devices. And, you know, I got like a bunch of RAM and a decent video card and all that stuff. The better components your computer's made up with, the better quality stream that you'll be able to push out. This is super important. We'll get to that in a second. But that's if you're streaming on your CPU. As you can see here, encoder, there's another option here. Now, depending on where you might see something for Intel QuickSync. If you're running NVIDIA cards, you'll see NVIDIA NVENC. If you're running AMD cards, you'll see like AMF or VCE or something along those lines. That a dedicated onboard encoder for video encoding, because nowadays the video compression that's being used, H.264, also known as AVC, yes, AVC, there's dedicated hardware now, because back in the day when it first came out, you needed kind of a more powerful rig because everything had to be done manually in software. Now we have little dedicated pieces of electrical hardware that just like, okay, video, okay, here you go. It's all decoded, no frame loss, maximum quality, all that jazz. And now we have the same things that encode. So when you buy the latest and greatest CPUs and GPUs and everything like that, they'll have a little specific hardware encoder on board that you can use. It is my personal opinion that of the current generation NVIDIA graphics card or the previous generation NVIDIA graphics card that are on the list to have the NVENC encoder, because there are some weird cards that don't actually have the encoder built in and stuff like that. Everything else is useless. You can get away with it, and there are times you will definitely have to use it. Or going for maximum fidelity, it is not worth it. The general knowledge assumption is that the NVENC encoder and the 10,000 series cards, so like your 1050, 60, 70, 80, I'm not entirely sure, I can't remember, and your 20, like 50, 60, the 1660s and all that stuff, the higher end NVIDIA graphics cards, that the NVENC encoder, after they did a lot of updates and everything like that, equivalent to medium of X264. Now you can see here, that's pretty low on, like, that's pretty good. Oftentimes people are streaming like very fast and for free off your graphics card. That is super useful, especially if you're streaming your gaming to Twitch. The fact that you've opened up a bunch of resources for free, very well. A use case, there was an online speedrun marathon that I was kind of the provider for, the back-end support. And I have Dell Optiplex, a Dell Optiplex that I got off eBay. It was around $200. It's an Optiplex. Wow. I think my internet's starting to crap the bed. So we're going to hit start recording just so I can splice stuff. But yeah. So if there's getting, actually, we'll drop the bit rate down. The thing that I keep talking about is what we're actually going to do. Okay, we'll drop that down to 3000 as well. Sorry for any frame drops. Internet can get really weird due to all the work at home and everything else. Anyways, so that's a Dell Optiplex. It has an older i7 CPU. If you don't understand what that means, basically back in the day, it had a fairly high-end component in it that let you do things. But even then, it kind of struggled a slight bit, but I put in it an older 1050 NVIDIA graphics card into it that has that. As soon as I switched it over to the NVIDIA encoder for the streaming, so we could stream at 1080p 60 without any bitrate restrictions and everything like that, because of the Twitch channel, the issues were gone. The processor usage was like almost nothing. The stream never stuttered. It was perfect. And that was a fairly cheap component because I got really lucky and I got it for $200. No, I think I got it for around $100, $150 Canadian because it was some off Chinese, not off, it was an official Chinese brand that somebody was selling on Amazon Canada, and they only had a couple. I'm fairly certain that they mixed up the model numbers, so they sold it at the price of a much older card, even though it was a brand new card at the time. So I got it for a steal. And even now, those cards, because they're older, they're less in price. Especially if you can get them on the used market. Now that deals with Bitcoin mining and usability and everything else. But if you plan for strictly encoding, that might be a good investment. The dedicated onboard encoder of those lines of graphics cards. We can actually see how their settings look like if we go here. You'll see that you got some settings here. If you're streaming, it's going to be on CBR the whole time. Profile. One of the things I did learn is, for whatever reason, high will stutter. So I just keep it on main, and then I don't have any problems. And you can jack this all the way up to max quality. If you have the newest line of NVIDIA graphics cards, you do not use max quality, actually. The NVIDIA website itself says that quality is what you should be using, and to max quality on the older cards. So if you have the newest generation of NVIDIA cards, you stick to quality. If you have the older one, you could go all the way to max quality. So that's kind of like your streaming tab. Recording. This is where we get to some kind of more interesting. So you can choose where to put your video files. By default, puts it in a videos folder. By default, it picks up MKV. Now, MKV is a super popular video format for a lot of downloads and all the likes, but a lot of editing programs don't actually like using MKV. But what a lot of programs actually do like using is TS. So if you plan on editing your recordings afterwards in a program like Premiere or Vegas or Resolve or something, I recommend TS. Now, you might have to convert the files over to a format like MP4, but the problem with MP4 is if there's ever any problem And you don't even have to see this problem. If there's any sort of problem, those files will get corrupted and are essentially non-recoverable. A couple years ago, there was a live event and the recordings were all to MP4, and one of the files got corrupted. The computer didn't crash, it didn't do anything. Surprisingly, the VOD that happened did not get corrupted, but there was nothing visibly going wrong with this recording. But when it came to the actual file, it got corrupted. Now, maybe this was due to transferring from different hard drives and such, but there was almost no way to put that into a program to kind of get the video out, and it just stopped working after a certain time too, even if you tried to play it back in a program like VLC. I hunted down some repair programs. I forget if I eventually had success. I don't think I had complete success, but the MKV and TS containers, they are meant to handle that. And they can both handle multi-track audio and all that stuff. So I like TS. TS is what, if you pop a Blu-ray into your computer, if you have a Blu-ray drive, those are TS files. If it works, it'll work for you. Encoder. So this is where you can kind of get things a little bit going. So if you stream on a week, okay, and you still want your archives to be of a higher quality, you have the ability to record in the higher quality. Currently, record at the quality that you are sending to the stream provider. There's no extra resources involved or anything like that. It just literally takes a copy of the video that you're sending out and dumps it into a file. Or you can tell OBS to do another encoding and take that and put it in the file. So on a PC like this, there is no problem with CBR at like medium, and then I'll also like do another encoding. I like CRF because 18 is visually transparent. It's compressed, but for the most part, you pretty much won't be noticing differences between before compression and after compression. Higher the number is, the more compression there will be. The lower the number is, the less compression. So like 0 is lossless. There's essentially quote unquote no compression. Again, I like really transparent, very fast, not a lot of resources involved, and that'll be your recording. But if you have that GPU encoder, maybe you want to GPU to encode that better quality recording of your stream. And so, as you can see, CRF is not an option here. Constant quality, something VBR, CBR. Now, in this case, I would do VBR. You would pop that equation that I did on the calculator to figure out where kind of like that point of diminishing returns is quality-wise. And I would put that as the bit rate. So if we were doing like a 1080p recording, I'd put like 12,000. And then I'd put the max bit rate to give it a little bit of some headroom in case it needs to go beyond that 1200. I'd go maybe like, I don't know, 15. Let's right. And then the bit rate will be variable. It will bring it up. It'll bring the amount up or down depending on what's happening on the screen. And it'll kind of around there visually, but it will spike up to that amount if there's too much on the screen and that's not going to cover it, it will bump up all the way to there. So if I'm on a weaker computer and it's like, like 2000, and you know, your Twitch stream might not look the best, but your recording is going to look phenomenal. And that's what you can maybe upload to YouTube or any service at a later date. So kind of capitalize on the fact that you do have that kind of, if you're on this hardware, you have that kind of gimme in terms of resources. And there was something I wanted to point out here. Rescale output. So I'm going to talk about that, but we're going to get to that in a second. Audio obviously controls the quality. It's fine. If you really want to like wow people because you're streaming like a band or something, this should probably be capped out. If you're doing like regular speaking, it's fine at default. Replay, that's a function I've never used and I'm not going to talk about it, but it's essentially meant for instant replays. We went over audio video. This is kind of interesting. So you have your base canvas resolution. So in this case, it's 1920. Its output is set to 720 bicubic, and then your frame rate. So if you're streaming video games, 60. If you're streaming kind of what I'm streaming right now, 30. I like to put this on Lansosh, however you want to pronounce that. It'll essentially sharpen up the image when it's taking the scaling to that. There's a lot of different options here, as you can see there. Bilinear will be very fast because it just averages lines together, but that can end up being inherently soft. Area better, in which case it's like a smarter kind of averaging. And then bicubic, Lansos are just kind of scaling algorithms that you can look up online and you can see exactly how they work. Depending on video that you're doing, one might be better over the other. It's more of an experimental thing. How long have I been live? Okay, yeah, there's a little bit of time left. I'll give myself enough, maybe 15, 20 minutes. So as you can see here, 1920. So 1920 is this right here. This little black screen is equivalent to 1920. So if I add, we can just add camera. I'm going to be twice on the screen on a second here. That's fine. So you can see I have a lot of different capture sources here. But if we go to this one here, this is my camcorder. It outputs 1920 by 1080 and it fills the entire screen, right? So this is what we're dealing with here. But what this does is it uses your graphics card to turn this into this. So it makes the image small. So if you gamed at 1080p here, your monitor's 1080p or whatnot, and you wanted this to be all 1080p, but for whatever reason, your resources don't allow for 1080p, but only 720p, this will scale it down to here. But, and this is essentially free because it's being done on your graphics card, but output is this number. The YouTube, Twitch, whatever provider you're using, they're going to get this. They're not going to get this, which means, and that's a full stop there. Even if you go to output recording, it's still that number there. Like you can see, it's the feed that you're getting here is 720 because that's what we set up here. That, okay. If you wanted to have let's say your stream, you wanted to make it 480, but you want your recording to be 1080. Well, match first off. So that way the OBS, the final stage of it, before it spits it out to your service provider, before it does that crunch of compression and spits it out, this has to be your recording resolution. And then you would do something like this, where you would rescale your output to a resolution here, okay? Now, this is not free. This resources on the CPU, and it looks like you can do it over NVENC as well. But this does require some resources because it has to take that 1080p image and has to shrink it in software to what that desired size, and then spit it out to the streaming provider. Now, you might have enough resources on your computer to be capable of doing, or maybe you don't. That's something you need to play around with. But basically, it's important to note that this is not free. This might cause recording issues where OBS will be like encoding overloaded or something like that. This does not, but you can't record in this if you do this, right? So it's just something to keep in mind. And then this sets the frame rate for everything. You can't change it. Hotkeys. If you want, you can set up a bunch of hotkeys to like change the scene, hide the scene, disable devices, stuff like that. So that's kind of like the settings. The important things out of all my rambling, personally, is that you disable all of this. If you have the means, figure out this and switch this to advanced. If there's anything you can remember out of this, those are the three things to kind of keep in mind. And then, you hit your apply, you hit your OK, you're good to go. And at the end of it, you're still staring at an empty OBS. So what we're going to do is, well, we've added my mic or webcam. So, there's a little bit of stutter right there. Probably some GPU encoding issues. So we'll just get rid of that. I'm also pulling the video device twice. But if it's pulling more resources than it can handle, it'll start dropping the frame rate there. So that's fine. So we have, you have your different. This is a scene, so if I add, let's say a text, like this is my intro. Hello. You can see that's I just added some text onto this scene. But if I want another scene, it can be like, I don't know, gaming. It's a brand new scene, as you can see. But the thing is, when you're live, whatever you edit here, like let's say you want to move this around, you move this around live, okay? So if you're live and you realize, oh, this is like that size, not this size. If you just all of a sudden grab this and then you size it, everyone watching you is literally going to see it go move around and then change in size. Depending on what you're doing, probably don't want. So there's a nifty option here called Studio Mode. And now you have your preview and your program. So now you can change up things here. Buy. Oh, that's a 9, not buy. Buy. Oh, there's an under there. Okay. You know what? I don't like that color. I'm gonna color here. Let's go with a whatever that is. Some sort of green yellow. I'm gonna move there. Oh no, I realize it's gonna go there. Now I can move it there. And I was able to do everything here. Did that. So this is actually very useful. If you're on an intermission screen or something, you can quickly check out everything that you're doing before you push it to live. And if you notice that something out of place or misaligned, you can fix it here and then just kind of transition it there. Like you see it just kind of fades and goes it there. So if it's a tiny fix, be very obvious that you just dragged it all everywhere. So that can be a very useful tool. So, you have your different scenes. We kind of went over adding text here. let's add my microphone, actually. We're going to call it mic. Now, I am currently using the M2. We're going to add. So you can see I've added the microphone, but it's not live on the scene yet because I'm allowed to add and remove sources. And as long as I don't hit that transition button, it's not going to go live to the stream. Or if I realize, oh, that's the wrong microphone, I can quickly fix that. And now if you see, if I transition, okay. Now I have my audio. You can see that the level is kind of there. The problem I have with this here is that if I kind of size this down, you can see that I have room for 1, I have room for 2, and I no longer have room. I need to kind of scroll. So if I add sources here, I could potentially add a capture or a microphone of some sort. Forget I have it in this scene, but it will still be live. And then you'll be like, where's the sound coming from? And it's because it was hidden here. Also, when you look at professional audio equipment, nothing goes side to side. It doesn't make any sense. So the vertical. Now this makes sense. You can see I can fit a lot more audio sources this way than I could this way. And it logically makes sense. If I want to put something quieter, it's just like I drag the fader down. If I want it louder, well, I drag the fader up. Very simple. Very, very simple. And the way that these audio meters work is obviously a volume here is kind of like the optimal volume. And then when you're in the red, you don't want to be in the red. That means you're about to like clip and distort and everything. So this gets people. And I was helping somebody with their stream a couple days ago. And they're like, I can't see where the audio is. And I just added it. And I'm like, you have to scroll down. They're like, oh, to like right click vertical. And they're like, oh my God, this makes a bunch more sense. Because it does. If it's louder, it's higher. Like every other piece of audio equipment that we are used to seeing. If you want it louder, you turn it. Nobody says turn it to the right. And my camera's reversed. Nobody says turn it to the right. They say turn it up. So this is this is a thing that I almost instantly do because it makes sense. As you can see, there's the cut. So it will just literally jump there instead of a fade. You can change the time for this fade. I can make it like a 50 millisecond fade. It's just gonna quickly, or I can make it super slow. I can make it like 1,000. Very slow. One of the changes there. So yeah, you can start to add in your sources here. I realized now this is cut off. Let's see. Let's get out a second so I can, hey, okay. So you have your different sources here. This one does not come by default. This is an external plugin created by a developer. Unless you deal with music or audio production, you probably don't know what this is, and you don't need it. Basically, a SIO, it's a way for audio equipment to interface with programs with the minimal amount of latency possible. So again, bands, audio production, stuff like that. I use a real mixer that supports this, so I use it. Latency, instead of going through the whole Windows microphone thing. You got your audio input capture, so that would be your microphones and all that. Audio output capture. So if you wanted to capture the sound coming, so that would be your desktop audio and everything like that. Browser. This one is a little bit tricky because to most people, browser capture, oh, that's going to capture my like Chrome or Edge or Firefox. That is not the case. It's a little bit different. What it actually does is it inserts a browser into the scene, completely separate of what you already have open. If you wanted to share a web page, okay. You wanted to share this, the DuckDuckGo onto your stream for whatever reason, because you're like, you wanted to showcase this website and how to do it, but you don't want your actual open. This is the way to do it. And if you tick Control Audio in OBS, and then you add it, you'll see that, hey, and if you interact with it, I'm trying to find where the interact button is. Interact. You can see that now you can kind of click things. So you can see I've clicked in there and I can type stuff. So if I needed to control the web page for any reason, I can do that in here. Now this is very for co-streaming or something, or you wanted to essentially embed a YouTube video or a Twitch stream or some other source that comes from a tab. You could just add it with this browser source. It's audio control here, so you have full control over it. Now, if it's a video player like YouTube or Twitch, you need to make sure that it's unmuted and the volume is obviously maxed out in the player. But then this is where kind of the use case of the audio monitoring comes into play, because now you can set up and you can have all the audio coming through here. Because let's say I was instructing something. I have like the web page here with a video or all these different audio sources. I have the microphone, I have the sound from this tab and some other things. Or, if I had a bunch of YouTube videos I wanted to queue up, I got you can unshow and show them and kind of switch around like that and control it all through here. And then you can monitor, and that's just by going advanced audio properties. You can have monitor off, monitor audio, mute the output to the stream, monitor and output. So that would let the stream and your audio device hear it. And this is fairly useful if you're the use case came out of me, but it's fairly useful to kind of use OBS as a virtual audio mixer. You need a virtual audio device that would support that, something like Voicemeeter or virtual audio cable or something like that. It's probably outside of the scope of this episode. But you can then just go straight to the device and you're good to go. You're in good shape. And this is where you can also choose the tracks. Because let's say I wanted to, I was recording something, but I wanted to record it without any voiceover, let's say, because I wanted this video to be able to be translated, but I don't want the translators to have to go through all the work. Everything will be recorded. So you can do audio tracks. So my mic will be one, but not track 2. And this browser will be in both track 1 and track 2. And when I go to my output and recording, you can see that I can pick which audio tracks I want to record. So when it records the file, you'll have that has both the audio and my voice. And then you'd have one that has the audio, but not my voice, which means that you can provide that video to somebody else and they can then do all the editing and stuff. So that's fairly useful. Things where you want recordings to not have specific audio sources in them, either sans commentary or sans video game audio or something along those lines. Again, kind of power user tool right there, but it can be fairly useful. And then kind of like the final tip that I wanted to go over is this projector. So this takes your whole OBS scene, either your preview or your output, and it spits it out in a window. So if I was doing a Discord or a Zoom Skype or something, and I want to set it up where like it is right now. I'm in the corner. This is the slide notes or lectures or whatnot, and my internet is really taking a dump. It's very annoying. But I wanted to do something here. I can now composite everything that I want in OBS. So I could have like for example, on the side here, I could have the slides here. I could have myself here. You know, I could composite this whole thing into one screen, pop it out as a windowed projector, kind of, and then I can screen share that to the program that I'm using. And if I have a virtual audio device monitored, if I have the audio monitoring sent to the virtual audio device, I can then also control the volume, because maybe you have a video that's very loud, and then maybe you also have a video that's kind of quieter. You can pre-balance all of those beforehand, play them and everything like that. So that's kind of like the culmination of using OBS, the kind of breakdown, not break thing that I wanted to do. Go over some things that I immediately changed and some use cases that maybe you haven't thought of before. Apologies for any frame drops. The way that cable internet works when everybody uses it, it's a downside to cable internet. It's generally faster, but if everyone in the neighborhood is using it, it slows it down. When you see those commercials for like fiber or telephone, fiber to the node, stuff like that, not cable internet, and they have those commercials where they're like yelling at their neighbors to not use the internet because it's slowing them down. That's legit thing. It's just a limitation of these services. But in either case, I hope that this was fairly useful. I think I've streamed long enough. I've been live over an hour. Sorry, the desk lamp can sometimes get super bright if my pupils kind of go there. So kind of transition to there. So yeah, thank you for the first episode. If you have any questions, kind of just feel free to ask them. And I will hopefully get to them the next episode, which will probably be a couple days. I don't know what the topic will be next episode, but realistically with these things, I don't want them to take too long. And I want the information that I cover to be kind of useful, mainly geared toward video game kind of streamers, but I also want it to have that kind of generalness along with it as well. So that way anybody can kind of watch this and this can be kind of a useful source of information for kind of weird things that people might run into. But yeah, obviously the quality will improve as I go. And for the moment, I have a lot of free time. When I run out of free time, these will probably slow down. But yeah, if you want to know when the next episode is, just follow the Stream Science Twitter, which would be @stream_sci. And I will see you guys next time. See ya.